Welcome back to the second session of this special edition of the Operator Signal. I am joined once again by Mr. JD Brem. Thank you for being on this second session with us. Today, we're going to talk about the growth to financeability and kind of building on the conversation we last had. And we'll be touching on building the back office of your manufacturing or distribution company, building that back office before you need it. So we can get right into it. JD, just refresh us in case anybody hasn't seen the first session. Tell us a little bit about Brem Enterprises.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having us today. What we do is we partner with manufacturing distribution companies that are attempting to put in that back office, if you will. They're growing. They may have it. It may not flow as well as you would hope. Yeah, it's technically accounting and finance by trade, but where the focus is how does that integrate with everything? Because accounting is just telling the story of what the rest of the business is doing. So the linkage between, say, order entry and HR, those all interweave through your financials, and your financials have to tell the story, right? And so my background is actually, I spent better part of 15 years in operational finance, partnering with plant managers, partnering with GMs, VPs of ops, saying, hey, how do we make your operations run? How do we, run the whole P&L? Because yeah, sales is out there selling it, but we have to deliver it at a reasonable margin. We have to make sure we're consuming cash at a reasonable amount, and we have to keep that customer happy, because in the end, if they're not happy, none of us are eating and none of us are continuing down the road, right? I mean, it's just about as simple as that. And it doesn't really matter which production system you aspire to. It all kind of falls into how do we keep them happy? How do we keep everything rolling? Um, we're a little different because we are more partner focused. Yeah, we're technically fractional consultants, but we come in and help you diagnose and solve your problem and build a solution so that, yeah, I can hang around, but the goal is you grow enough that you hire a full-time version of me. My job is to help you get to the point that you can do that.
I like it. Perfect. So let's get right to it. You and I have talked about the idea of financeability kind of in the last session. What does that actually mean for an industrial company or manufacturing company?
Yeah. So, I mean, for where I see this usually break down is when it's smaller organizations that have grown, and they should be very happy about the growth they've had. They should be ecstatic that, hey, we've made it here, because most businesses that start don't make it through, and it's a fair answer to say, hey, I made it here, and now I want to grow into something that I need to borrow some money to build. I need to bring in an outside investor. Those people need to believe in the financial backbone of your organization, and it has to go a little bit further than, hey, I have this napkin I wrote down that I issued this invoice to my customer. It was on a notepad. Okay, that's awesome. But how collectible are those funds? How realistic is it that you only spent what we think you spent? And that's where the books being clean and being able to go through that scrutiny level of, hey, if I'm an outside investor, do I want to make sure my money's going into where it needs to, not just the dream, but what's actually presented to me as what's happened. From a bank's perspective, it's how likely am I going to get that money back? Where I see most things break down is when we start really peeling back the onion and saying, hey, what's happening here? Oh, well, that wasn't supposed to be in that month. That was an oops. That wasn't supposed to be there. The goal is, when we talk about the financials of your organization, it tells the story of your organization. We don't have an accounting conversation. We have a, hey, here's where the business is and here's where the businesses go. I don't like sitting on those conversations where it's, oh, well, we accrued this, we did this when you're in a larger org, because then it becomes an accounting problem. Well, the same thing exists in the smaller orgs where you say, hey, yeah, I did this because if I pay the whole bill in December, then I get the entire tax benefit. All right, cool. That's a fair conversation to have. But when you say, oh, wait, oops, I had a oops in my accounting and I had to recognize a bunch of cost, that's not a fun conversation to have. Let's talk about where you're going, what you're building. Let's not have the other fun conversations where it just passes the buck around to accountants.
Yep, on the money right there, I'll say. And you kind of touched on some of this, but let's go a little bit deeper. What do lenders, investors, buyers, strategic partners typically want to see from a company's financials before they're willing to support growth or expansion or even a transition like an exit?
They're really going to be looking to how solid, sustainable are those numbers. And the solid piece is the front piece of how reliable is the information I'm getting. Can I go pull a sample of certain transactions, certain things, and prove that's what happened? And while, yes, I just said something that was really lofty, it's really not that complex, right? It's, hey, when we go look at your customer concentration or go look at the invoices that you're issuing, how real are they? Very few people are being nefarious trying to do different things. Just there's a lot of rules about that now because there's been a few big situations that have happened because people have been. But they're looking for, how do they safeguard their investment? How do they know it's going to come through as they expect? Because You've got your skin in the game, you're running the business, but now you want to partner, or now you want to borrow money to buy a new machine. It's how do I prove to them how I got here? How do I prove to them how I got here is real? And then how do I show them the path forward? And when you're going for borrowing money or capital investment that you're going to use to pay for, a new machine, it's not only the accounting behind it and the numbers. It's hey, can the facility support it? Are we running at the top end of our capacity spectrum? Not only from a machine, labor, workforce perspective, but you also have to talk about, can my building sustain the inventory that I'm going to add by doing this? Because if I put in another machine, I'm taking up floor space. Well, that floor space may be inventory space, it may be maintenance space, it may be something. So you really have to start with, hey, what does the demand from my customer look like? Or what am I trying to fulfill? How much space is that going to eat on the floor? How do I get all of these different pieces of the business together? And in smaller organizations, large organizations, you hear the word function. Smaller organizations, it's literally just, shop manager or someone looking over someone else saying, hey, can we do this? Okay, yeah, cool. It's like we can, but very few do I see actually draw all of that out to say, it doesn't have to be a CAD drawing. We can do this on a whiteboard, even just saying how fast these need to move through, how many I'm going to have sitting in the factory, how long then is it going to take for the customer to pay me back? Because if I build 60 days of cash conversion cycle, but I owe my bills within 30, well, now I have a problem where I need to go talk to a lender. Now I have a problem where I need to go talk to my capital partner and say, hey, I'm going to have a cash problem. The timing of that, it may look profitable as all hell on the books, but if I can't sustain the cash piece, that's the part where a lot of this breaks. And when you come back to what that bankers and lenders want, they love situations like this because they can see the growth, they can see things. Growth is a good problem to have, but if you don't manage it carefully, you end up in a really bad cash situation. Whereas you can see this coming, you can go have a conversation and say, hey, I need to go put some money into my working capital. I'm going to get this out of it. And when you have those pieces, a lot of those pieces fall into place, and it's a lot easier of a conversation to borrow money or bring someone else on.
Yeah, substantially. And I can second that with all of the people, professionals, advisors that I interview on a regular basis. They're usually talking about those pieces breaking the conversation when someone is trying to exit or they're simply trying to get financing from the bank. It's literally all those pieces you just touched on. So that's excellent. Um, so where do you see, and I guess we'll be really expanding on this from a couple things you just touched on, but where do you most often see companies struggle when they need capital, want to buy equipment, expand their facilities, preparing for a transaction? Kind of expand on that, if you will.
So when you're looking to expand your facility, you got to accept that it's going to become basically like having two full-time jobs, if not three, because you're growing, and growing is painful, but it's also very rewarding. You have to have a specific plan. As one of my old CEOs used to say, plan the work and do the plan. The plan will change, but plan the work and do the plan. That's what you got to always fall back into is, do we have a plan for when X, Y, and Z are going to happen? Like when I was expanding facility in Mansfield, the plan was, hey, as machines show up, it takes this long to put them in. Okay, well, obviously that drifted, took time. Parts weren't as available as we wanted. The plan drifted, but we knew where we were going from one step to the other. And it was very meticulous and frustrating at first. It took the better part of a few months to plan this all out, to have the contractors lined up, to have everything lined up. But what all of that feeds is everybody goes, oh, well, there's a P&L and a balance sheet at the end. But all of that planning up at the front tells your finance partner, where do I need the money? When am I going to spend the money? And how long is it going to take before it starts coming back? Because that's where it comes back to that whole financeability and struggling with capital is, if I put $3 million into a plant this year, yeah, most places want to get it back within, 2, 3 years. The reality is I got to go borrow that money from somewhere else. I got to go get it somewhere else. And if I don't have a very specific plan to say, okay, I have this much money in inventory. I have this much money I'm about to pay out in a machine. The machine, by the way, that's not the only cost, right? I've got to pay to have it moved. I got to pay to have it put in. I got to pay to have it run off. I got to run all this kind of crap off of it to get my PPAP and engineering certs and all that stuff, depending upon which industry you're in. So it's very deceiving at first to say, yeah, I'm expanding the plan. I need a $3 million machine. That $3 million machine is probably going to turn into $6 million in cash before you know it, because between the install, between the taxes, by the way, your property taxes go up too, right? Because you have real property. You have everything else that goes into there. And that's where I see the struggle is, hey, I went and bought a $3 million machine. Cool. What's your plan on where you're going to store that inventory? Oh, we actually took out racks to put that machine in. Okay. Well, does your customer pick it up right after? The answer is no, then now suddenly I'm putting it in trailers, I'm warehousing things, I'm doing all these different pieces. And that's where a capital investment has to be whole encompassing. And everybody likes to think it's just the finance exercise. It's not. It's the entire business coming together. And finance and ops, finance kind of comes in at the end and puts a little we polish it up a little bit, put the numbers behind it, but it really needs to be an operational plan. And there has to be that linkage of when I pull the lever on the left, the finance lever on the right is going to move in the same direction, or it's going to move exactly where I expect it to. And that's where you have to put that focus.
Yeah. See, and remember for those watching, this is about building the back office before you need it, not after the fact. So, um, thank you yet again, JD. You're on point as usual. That's why we're talking to you. So how can better financial reporting, back office discipline, how can that help owners make stronger decisions around pricing and margins and inventory, like you mentioned, and labor and cash flow and all of those things?
So where a lot of that has to happen is you have to meet the business where it's at. If you're in a very, low tech adopted organization, there's nothing wrong with it, by the way. A lot of great shops run on paper. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't want that to be the point that's taken away here is you have to say, okay, what systems and processes are in place? And that's what I mean by you have to meet. Doesn't always mean a new system. It doesn't always mean upgrades or we're going to completely change the way we do this. A few times I've walked in, there's been no choice, but we're going to change the way we do this because we cannot continue in the way we're going. um, Growth without a underpinning system or that back office support is where you usually end up losing yourself, right? I can't grow without having the discipline to look at what I'm spending. I can't grow without realizing that, uncontrolled growth is dangerous. Uh, Having that back office and where you start talking about reporting is it comes in and says, okay, what do my incoming orders look like? Yeah, I may have built the factory, I may have built the things, and I have a plan of who I'm going to go talk to, and I may already have some demand there, but I probably built more than I needed on the plan that it's going to grow. It's like building a school, right? You always plan a little extra. How orders get in, how does production know what to build? How do we have that push and pull of inventory if we're going to be holding inventory? If we're custom built, how do we know absolutely that we can build what they're asking for? How do we have the specific requirements designed? And so that's where, the project/contract conversations come in, the orders and the visibility to what those look like come in. They're never perfect. Don't let anybody else, accuse you. But if you can get 50 to 60% of the way there, you're probably heads and shoulders above a lot of people. And then inventory management of where am I going to put all this? What do I expect? Have I set up the limit of saying, if I fill this part of the warehouse, I stop for a little while because I've got so much inventory. I now need to find out how I'm going to get the cash out because that same cash that pays for inventory pays for your employee salaries, pays your salary, pays everything else. And so having those systems to where we haven't even talked about the finance piece yet, right? We're just completely talking about how to run the business. The finance piece comes up and sits up on top of all that and says, all right, cool. I can see all these things happening. How do I forecast what cash is going to look like for the next quarter? How do I forecast what the P&L is going to look like? But most importantly, how do I forecast how much inventory and how many dollars I'm pushing in and out to make sure we can afford this? Because operating accounts are always limited, right? There's only so much cash. There's only so much that we can afford to do. And that kind of leans back into your conversation about, hey, do we need money to put into working capital from an outside source? And those outside sources are only limited to, we either have an investor or we get a loan.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of good intel there. I hope you guys are taking notes. Let's touch on AI and automation. Those are big topics right now. But many business owners, I think, are confused about what's practical. Where do you see technology actually helping accounting, compliance, documentation, kind of like you just touched on? Where are you seeing?
So AI is pretty interesting in how it can help us. I do not think it's the white collar job killer that everybody thinks it is. But for repetitive tasks that you're not interested in doing anymore, you can teach it a lot of things. For instance, I had Claude build a bank rec one point. I've had it go through and look at my personal bank statement, and it summarized and did a lot of things for me. Um, there's a lot of wins where you can automate, follow-ups with your customer, like your CRM notes. They've already been automated for a while, but you can further leverage those. You can leverage your receivables and your payables of trying to say, hey, how can I automate this through the process where I put a human touch point where I want it and I get the machine to do what it can do. It's a lot like out on the shop floor. I believe it was the Toyota production system has that quote unquote automation where they use those different pieces and say, hey, look, I'm going to use the machine for what I can. I'm going to use the person for what I can. You still want that judgment. You still want that person looking at it saying, hey, that number normally is $10,000. Why is it 30? Why is it 40? Why is it moving around? Something is deviating from the norm. If I have a reason, great. If I don't, that's where you push pause and say, hey, come back. Let's figure out what's wrong with this. AI is great at spotting trends. It's great at helping us find things, but it does need that higher level control that says, hey, we've been here and done this enough. We're not going to let you go off on the deep end and make decisions. To me, that's where the value is. It can get through a lot of those manual tasks faster.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that we could probably unpack with that, I think. But just for time, we'll keep it moving here, and well, that'll bring us actually to our last question, and that's looking forward, right? So if you were advising a Fort Worth manufacturing owner who's wanting to grow over the next 12 to 24 months, what are the first three things you would want them to clean up or professionalize?
The big thing I would say is build a partnership amongst the people you're using within your organization, whether they're internal or external. Yeah, I'm in finance. I speak from the finance discipline. I've sat in ops. I've done that. But the linkage of sales, finance, ops, kind of playing back and forth of knowing exactly what's going on. Where I'm starting is you're saying, hey, I'm going to start with margin visibility. I got to understand, am I making money? Am I not? What's coming down the pipeline? How am I going to run the business? Because that feeds right into, okay, can I afford to run the business this way? Are we hitting our growth metrics, our goals? Even if you're just saying, hey, I want to do what I did last year, but I want to be a little bit more profitable, or actually, I just want to do what I did last year because I had a banner year. It doesn't matter. You've just got to have that. You've got to line all your different teams up and say, hey, how do we work together? How do we get this together and feed into what finance puts out on the other end? There's been a few businesses I've been in where finance is kind of the black box where things pop out the other end. It's not a fun position to be in because finance is really just telling the story. We're just the kind of like the bone that weaves between everybody. We just pull all the information out and turn it into numbers. And I'd say the last thing is, and my accounting friends will probably be mad at me, but a monthly close that happens on time because you set up the process to where you produce the financials through a process that follows. You know what normal is, you know what abnormal is. You highlight those pieces, and when it's abnormal, you step back and say, hey, something's not right here. How do I go check this? What happened? You should be doing a lot of these tasks throughout the month so that you have your check-ins and you're guiding the business as it goes. Finance were the quote unquote scorekeepers, if you will, but really it's where you partner and say, hey, I want to be more than a scorekeeper. I want to alert the business to, hey, something happened. Like, for instance, if $50,000 in cash we weren't expecting disappeared, what happened? Oh, well, we bought more inventory than we planned. All right, cool. When are we going to get it back? Right? When are we going to do these different things? And I'm talking to this from a very operational perspective of, hey, finance is not just the numbers in the corner. You've got to bring them up and make self-help tools so that the rest of the business can make the decisions. You're the one that goes and summarizes and brings it all to them. But I mean, my goal is, hey, how do we talk margin? How do we talk about how we run the business? And then how do we actually close the books so we meet the needs of, say, when I need financing, my books can undergo the scrutiny to get it done? How do we make sure that if we want to bring in a capital partner or the owner does want to sell, it doesn't start a 3-month process to go back and clean the books because we're just not ready.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's typically what happens. I think the biggest takeaway there I would like to re-highlight for everyone is what we just kind of said there is use your people. Use your advisors, your team, listen to them. You put them there for a reason. And I hear that sentiment echoed constantly from other advisors wishing that their clients and their team would actually pull them into conversations to start with and heed the advice so that they don't have to go back and clean up too much. Excellent insights, JD. There's a lot of good intel there. Thank you so much for your insights again, as usual. And for those of you watching, make sure you check out the session. This is the second one. Check out the first one in case you missed it. You can find it on the YouTube channel. And those of you that are wanting to reach out to JD, just connect with him on LinkedIn. But JD, thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for the insights. And I look forward to our next session. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.